Hi and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I thought we'd explore at something, well, I haven't seen really done in the past. I know people have done it, but it's something that for some reason I haven't really seen posted anywhere for others to benefit from. And that is, how can we make combo boxes, list boxes, sort of adjust to the size of the data that we're trying to put in them. You know, as developers, we go in there, we set the size of columns as best we can based on what we have, the resources and information we have. But, you know, databases evolve, and sometimes what we initially set up may not be what is required as the data set evolves. And so therefore, sometimes we'll get columns that are simply too small to display what's actually required, or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe the column width that we specified is too large and we're wasting space and therefore limiting other columns from displaying fully. So I set out just for fun, actually. I just wanted to explore this a little bit. In reality, I wasn't exploring this per se. I was recovering code I had used years ago for a client in which I had done basically translations. So the database was initially designed in English, but then we wanted to translate it into other languages, primarily out here where I live in French. The issue comes that when you get into translations of that style, a lot of times when you translate a term, it won't be the same size, the same length, the same width. And then you can get into problems, especially you have really, dense forms, that when you do the translation, the content doesn't fit in the caption. So in the text box, in the label. And then I needed to come up with a method of dealing with this, and eventually I came across WizHook. Now, WizHook is one of these hidden features in Access. It's not documented, but it has a hidden ability that we can use, amongst others, because it has several, but we can use it to calculate the length, the width of a string. And with that, then you can resize either your control, or you can change the font size to make things fit. There's all sorts of options you can do here. But getting back to today's subject is, if I'm able to calculate the width of a string, I can then adjust the size of the width of the columns in my combo boxes, in my list boxes, to make it fit. And that's exactly what I did. On the article that I have the proof of concept code, and that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm going to have to loop through all the entries of the combo box or the list box, and I'm going to have to determine the width of that string. And I'm going to compare it to the maximum width that I'm currently storing. So basically, I'm just going to go row by row by row, column by column, and I'm going to check which of the entries has the greatest width. And once I've determined that, then now I can resize my columns based on that maximum width. It isn't rocket science. It's just a question of creating some loops and knowing of the existence of this WizHook, which many people aren't aware of. It just isn't well known. And this is where you're going to see here string dimension. It's really simple. I'm using WizHook, and I'm doing twips from font. You pass it the font name, the size, the weight, is it italic, is it underlined? You give it all the information you have about your font, and it will return to you the height, and it will return to you the width. So for today's discussion, I'm only interested in the width. But as you can see, this guy will also return to you both. And therefore, if you're trying to adjust, let's say, controls, a label and things like that, like I did in the translation example, then this becomes important. For the combo box and list box adjustment that we're discussing today, I'm just ignoring the height. It's not of an importance. So basically, it's a combination of this helper function and then this guy here. And like I say, we're going to just literally loop over all the rows and then all the columns of each row, because we have to check each entry. And we're going to determine what the maximum width of each entry. I had explored, there are other approaches we could take. It depends. This is more of a versatile thing that we can throw at any case. If you are 100% sure that you're always dealing with an SQL statement, then it would be possible to use, a max or a length and go get the maximum value of the length from each column. There might be more optimal ways of proceeding, but this solution will work with any scenario. So let's look at this in operation. What the heck is this guy talking about? Well, so I have a simple demo database. We'll just use simple table. The key field here that we're seeing is this guy here. So I'm going to remove this for right now. We're just going to make it a simple email address, nothing too long, nothing excessive. And we have names and login. Okay, nothing spectacular. Now, if we open up my demo form, you will see that we have the default width. So I've predefined some widths here. And as you can see, I wasn't very smart about it. And this width, the column for the emails, is obviously too small. And then here we have an AutoResize version, where as you can see, it has resized the column, sent the entirety of the different columns, the data is always shown. And we can prove this even further, that if we do come in here now and add a longer email address, that once again, the first example, the default example where we hard code widths, it's cut off. We don't know what's beyond this. Versus the one that uses code to adapt and resize the columns based on the content, as you can see, has adapted, and I'm still able to see the full content. Well, this isn't rocket science. This is not hard to achieve, and let me show you how it's done. So we're all familiar here with a combo box with multiple columns. We come to the column width and we would insert the widths. Now, typically you're going to look at the data, you're going to do your best guess, and you're going to try to design something and try to future-proof it as best you can. But we all know that databases evolve over time. And as such, sometimes we end up with surprises. In which case, the width that we've defined won't suffice and you end up with truncated information and a poor user experience. And this is where this came from, this whole idea of automatic resizing of columns. And it would be nice if it was just some type of property where we could just say, resize columns, yes. But currently it's not there. And this is where this came from. It's very simple. You're going to see I use it right off the bat in the form load event. So as the form loads, I'm doing all my resizing. You can resize one combo box, you can resize 12, you can resize list box. It's up to you. But it's always the same process. Nothing there ever changes. And it's as simple as that. All I'm doing is I'm calling my function and passing it the control. Okay. I can also specify the resizing technique used. Now, by default, I'm using this explicit sizing. And I'm assuming like 99% of the people, that's going to make them happy. And you saw the result. But there are some that don't like that. And they want to always make sure that the width of their list is in line with the width of the control. And that's where I came up, or I input a second option. And let's go up to the top here, which was the size to fit. And it's going to create a ratio based on the content to display. So you're going to end up with truncation, or the possibility of truncation, but it's going to do its best to provide a ratio based on the content of each column. Versus if you use the default value or you specify explicit sizing, it will resize the columns and guarantee that you see the entire content. So let's look at this. The first example here was my initial. I was going to create a function for combo box, one for list box, but that isn't necessary. So I created a more versatile one, which is the one that's on the website. And it's simply control auto resize columns. We pass it the control, we pass it the resize technique like I just mentioned to you above. So which type of resizing do you want to do? How does it work? It's really, really simple. We're going to go through, we're going to first determine based on our control how many columns we have, how many rows we have. Once we have that information, we can redimension an array, and we're going to use that array in a moment to go through and determine each column's maximum entry, basically the entry, the value that has the longest entry. And we're going to now run through the columns. As you can see, we're going to then run through the rows and columns, going and looking at the length of the entry versus the length that's currently stored in our array. And if the length of the entry is superior to the one that we're currently storing in our array, then we're going to replace the one in our array. So basically, for every column, we're going to create an entry in an array that will be equal to its maximum or maximum length entry. So basically, very simply, is we're going to go row by row in your combo box or your list box. And for each column, because we have to treat each column separately, we're going to identify which value has the longest string. That is going to be the one that we're going to have to use to resize the columns based on. Once we've determined the maximum length values, then we can come down here, and it depends on which resizing technique we're using. But for the default one, which, like I say, 99% of people, this is what they're going to be after. We're going to now go through the columns, because we have to do this for each column. We have to determine the width for each column. And we're going to go through and we're going to check what width we have in our array. So we have the default, if ever someone explicitly put in their column width property, so if we come back here, if somebody specifically said in their column width that they wanted 0, so it's a hidden column, we don't want to be overriding that. Okay, so that's what this is all about here, this initial thing. If it's already set to 0, we're not messing with that, we're leaving it at 0. However, in every other case, we're going to take that maximum string length, so we're going to find that value, and we're going to pass that value to the WizHook function. And that WizHook function is going to take 2-by-val variables, so it's going to return to us the height and the width. It's going to do a calculation for us, and we pass it the value, the font size, the font weight, the font, is it italic, is it underlined, and it will do the calculation based on that information relative to the font. So it's going to return to me, in my case, all I'm interested in is the width. I'm not looking at the height. So I'm going to get this width returned to me, and then I'm able to set that as my column width. And you're going to see I also have to add a little bit of a buffer. The WizHook calculation is slightly on the underside, at least in my experience. And as such, I add a buffer to the calculation. And if you look here, I just have a buffer. It's a constant value at 150. Sometimes you can tweak it a little less. It depends on the visual aspect. So you may want to tweak that a little bit, how much of a padding you want around the values in the columns. But for me, 150 was about right. And so it's going to basically go, and it's going to do this for each column, determining the width. And then we just come down to the end, and we're able to take those column widths and simply apply it to our control. And that literally is how easy this is to do. So we're simply going to iterate over all of the values here, find the longest entry in each column, and then use that to calculate the required width to make it fit. And then we just pass it back to our control saying, these are the widths you should use. Things are a little bit trickier if you want to go with that other styling, which is we want to keep it at the width of the combo box, but we want things to be proportional. And it's going to have to calculate the total width, which is why here you're going to, you're going to calculate the total width. Then it's going to calculate the width of each column. And based on that, it creates this ratio here. So with the ratio, it creates a percentage that it attributes to each of the columns based on its content. So it's going to give proportionally more width to a column based if it has more content than another one. But you will end up with truncation if you have widths, contents, values that are large. There's just no way around it. And that's why I say typically the explicit sizing is what most people are after. But I do know some people that this is the approach they prefer. They don't really care necessarily about truncation. They just want to make things, like I say, proportionally sized. And that's it. Like I say here, you're going to use what function I created, string dimension. It's on the web page as well. And if we just jump to that for 2 seconds, okay. And it is literally just calling the WizHook. Okay. So it's doing the twip from font. And like I say, you pass it the font name, the size, the et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it returns to you what the height is and what the width is. And that's it. So we're just employing WizHook to do the heavy lifting of calculating how much room does this string take. And with that, you're able to get really, really nice results and fast. So default is this, but with resize in place, we get a nice thing where we can read the full content. Let me just show you the difference if we go to the resizing scaled version. Well, pay attention here for 1 second. And let's come here. Let's go into design mode. Let's copy this guy. Let's make another one. So combo 6. So it's the exact same content. I'm not changing any widths. I'm not doing anything there. We're just going to go into our load event. And this time we're going to take this guy. This guy. We're going to put him here. We're going to switch it to 6. And now we're going to do the size to fit instead. Okay. By default, it's not. So we're going to tell it use the proportionality setting. Now let's look at how this compares. Now we can put all 3. So you know the default one, it's truncating here. But you've got a lot of blank space, as you can see, wasted space. So if we resize things proportionally, you'd be able to see more of the email address column. If we go to the explicit sizing, as you can see, it's going to resize and it's going to start exceeding the width of the combo box. And it's going to take up more and more room, whatever is required to display the lists properly. However, if you go to the sizing to fit, it wants to stay in the boundaries, the width, the maximum width of the combo box. So it isn't going to exceed. It's not going to go beyond those boundaries. But it's going to look at what's being or needs to be displayed, and it's going to try to proportionally redimension things. So it's going to do its best without going out of bounds. And that's basically the 2 choices I've set up currently. Things to note here, obviously, right now, I'm using it because I wanted to keep things as simple and try to reduce the performance hit. Depending on fonts, you can get into just because a string is longer than another in length doesn't necessarily mean that the width of the font, once calculated out, would actually be superior necessarily to certain other ones that are close in length, because some fonts, certain characters are larger in width than others. I'm not doing that, okay? I'm not calculating the WizHook value for every single entry, right? I'm only figuring out which one has the longest length. And you see, remember, we're checking the length here, and I'm just capturing that and only doing the calculation of the WizHook on that one entry. It could easily be argued that I should be doing the WizHook calculation here instead of the length, and comparing the calculated width of the string in consideration of the font characteristics for every single entry. I didn't do that because there's going to be a performance hit there, substantially more than going through just the length. And I haven't found it to be a huge problem. But I am going to just mention to you, if you really want to be picky, you really want to be 100% thorough, that is what would be required, because different fonts have different characteristics. And yeah, you can have something, let's say, that has a width, length, should I say, of 100 characters, but something could have a length of, let's say, 98 characters, but some of those characters are wider, so it could actually be longer in width, numerically, if you measure it, versus the one that had 100 characters. So yeah, this isn't 100% foolproof, but let me tell you, it's a huge step in the right direction. This allows your data to evolve over time. This allows your users to do, use the database as they need to use it, but to know that your solution over time is going to evolve with the data, and we'll always try to guarantee them the best user experience possible. So for me, this is a huge improvement. I'm going to stop there. As you can see, you've got a couple good options. that you can implement, and realistically both are better than having this type of scenario where you've got lots of wasted white space and truncation, major truncation, versus you can come here, have fully displayed content, or at least more proportionally, and reduce the wasted white space. You still have truncation, but at least you're seeing a lot more content. You're improving your user's experience tremendously, and it's minimal code, very easy to drop into place. 2 functions, copy them into the standard module, or however you want to operate. And then, like you saw, to put it into use, it's as simple as a single call. You can do this for combo boxes and list boxes. It works really well. It respects, like I said, if you have already set specific columns that you are hiding, we're considering that, and we ignore those ones. We're not going to overrule them. So we're able to preserve those hidden columns. So it's a useful function, and I hope it helps a few of you out there. Hope it's something new that I'm assuming many of you haven't seen or even considered in reality, but it really is something that is worth thinking about implementing in your forms. It really does help the user experience out tremendously. You can also get into other things too if you want, especially if you go with this option. Perhaps then you can get into an iterative loop. Yes, you might end up with a performance hit. These are things you have to weigh in the balance and decide the pros versus cons. But this is the type of thing where you could do a calculation and check and see if I'm going to resize it based on the width and the proportionalities. Am I displaying everything, or is it going to be truncated like this? So you use the WizHook and you recalculate the calculation of the maximum width. Does it meet the required width to be able to display the full content of that entry? And if it turns out to be no, then you can reduce the font size by 1 point, reperform the calculation, and then, oh, yes, it's going to fit. We'll go with that. No, it still doesn't fit. We reduce it by another point. And you can do this iterative process to ensure that 100% of the content does get displayed, even in this type of scenario. But you would need to add in some safeguards too, because you don't want to go too far in downscaling a font, for instance, in case somebody makes a major error in some entry and really abuse the resizing functionality. I actually did this in a translation database for a client that was translating from English to French. There were certain terms translated in French that there was just no way around. They took substantially more space. There was no easy way of translating them. And the solution at the end of the day to make everything work was to have that type of iterative loop that would downgrade, resize at a lower point size the font. And often we'd be dropping by 1 or 2 points to make things fit properly and have a bit of padding around and things like that. So just to offer up, you want to take things even further, I'm showing you basically the basics, giving you the proof of concept and how it can be implemented, but feel free to take this even further. I'm going to stop here, guys. Wishing you all a great day. Thank you all for spending a couple of minutes with me today. Greatly appreciated. As always, like, share, subscribe, and take care. We'll see you in the next one.